Forgive me sitting upon this stool. This is a new gimmick that is used by artists these days. The idea, of course, is to give an impression of relaxation. It is what is known in my profession as the Dave Allen myth. If an actor doesn't know what to do with his hands, he has a walking stick. If he doesn't know what to do with his mouth, he has a cigarette. I have a stool. Now, my name is Jon Pertwee, which it isn't. Not truly. My real name is Jon Pertwee de Layevo, and I hope you're very impressed. I come from a long line that my mother should never have listened to, a French line of Huguenots. The majority of my family was, in fact, Catholic in France. In 1865, they pushed out the Protestants. And there was one Protestant, a man called Georges de Pertwee de Layevo, and he moved into Suffolk. And the large Pertwee clan, as it's known today, is the result of his personal athleticism. And nobody could pronounce the name properly, Pertwee de Layevo, P-E-R-T-H-U-I-S. They couldn't pronounce it, so the illiterate English pronounced it Pertwis. So it was duly changed to P-E-R-T-W-W-E. With the result is they called it Pee-wee, etc., etc. Now, I have here in my autobiography, Moon Boots and Dinner Suits, which you can't buy any longer, it's out of print. It says, due to the inability to pronounce the name Pertwee, other than Pertwis, it was changed to Pertwee. This proved a pointless exercise, as over the years, even in England, I have been subjected to the following interpretations of my name, the veracity of which I swear to, having avidly filed them away over the years. And here's a list of them. Tom Peetweet, Jon Pertwee, Mr. Twee, Mr. Bert Wee, which I like, John Pee-wee, Miss Jane Partwick, Master J. Peewitt, Mr. Petweek, Joan Pestwick, J. Pertiny, John Between, I like that, and Mr. and Mrs. Jon Perky. And when I was in America, I was working on Broadway, and I used to walk down Broadway, and I looked up, and there it was, Jon Pertwee, and I was so proud of the fact my name was in lights. And after 6 months, I walked into the theatre one day, and there was the stage doorkeeper, sitting at the end of the passage, smoking his big stogie, and he said, "Hey, Jan." And I paid no attention, of course, my name not being Jan, and I walked on merrily into the theatre. And he said, hey, psst, Jan. And I said, who, me? He said, yeah, Jan Putrid, there's a letter for you. So from that moment onwards in America, I was always known as Jan Putrid, which I suppose is better than when I was standing outside Grosvenor House many years ago. Somebody came up to me and said, excuse me, but weren't you Jon Pertwee? That's nice, isn't it? Weren't you, Jon Pertwee? And a lady, this is an extraordinary story, it's not that funny, but it's an extraordinary story. There's a lady, and she came up to me when I was with a great dear friend of mine, and she said, excuse me, but aren't you Helen Twelvetrees? And I said, Helen Twelvetrees is a very elderly character actress. And she said, that's right. That's true. On another occasion, I remember getting into a train. I was going to see a Doctor Who conference, and I usually wear the sort of Doctor Who gear when I go to these conferences, and I had my Doctor Who cape on. And I tried to find somewhere in this train that was empty, and the whole train was absolutely full. And I walked up, and there was a compartment that was empty, but it had a little label stuck in the window. It said, this compartment is reserved for people from St. Thomas's Hospital. And so I thought, there's nobody there, so I'll go in. And I sat down, and just as the train was leaving, the door opened, and in came two men in white coats with a collection of people, all of it doolally-taps. They all sat down very happily, and the nurse thought he'd count everybody up and check them all out, and he said, right, now let's have you, and let's have a little count here. Now then, 1, 2... And he looked at me, he said, who are you? And I said, I'm Doctor Who. He said, 4, 5, 6... Anyway, as I was telling you, I come from a long theatrical family. My father was Roland Pertwee. He was an eminent playwright, and some of you may remember as a writer. He was a scenarist. He worked a lot in Hollywood and in England writing movies. My uncle Guy, he looked after me when I was very little because my father and mother split up when I was tiny. My mother took one look at me and went, ooh, no, and she left. And so my granny looked after me. And my Uncle Guy, too. I just would like to say, guys, look here, Mother. He taught elocution as a lesson. He was the professor of the Guildhall School of Music and Drama at the Guildhall, and he taught elocution. Extraordinary how he managed. He was the only man I ever knew who had a motor car, and he didn't change gear to go uphill. He leant forward slowly. Uncle Guy. My grandmother was an opera singer. She had the sort of voice that you use to augment grief at funerals. Lovely voice, though, she had. Dame Eva Moore, her daughter was Jill Esmond, and Jill Esmond married Laurence Olivier, the world's greatest actor, in my opinion, it was. And let me give you an example of why I say that. He was very shy in many ways. He didn't like people approaching him from the back. Understandable in some ways, but he did it from the front, fine. The back, no. And we went to a party once, and I said, come on, Larry, we're going to this lovely party. He said, no, I'd really rather. I said, yes, you're going. He said, I said, yes, you're going. So we took him and we put him on a sofa, and we gave him drink and a sandwich, and we said, no, you'll be all right. And he started to relax when an elderly lady came up behind him and she clapped her hands over his eyes and she said, guess who? And that's exactly the sort of thing he hated. So he went, and the lady fell backwards and she fell against the settee behind and she went AOT over the settee with the legs in the air, with the black bombazine knicker well to the fore. And he paid no attention to it at all. And he went over to his host and he said, who is that old woman? He said, oh, that's my mother-in-law. He said, isn't she marvellous? Doesn't that prove to you that's the world's greatest actor? Well, anyway, we all used to forgather in our house in London, and we used to do plays at Christmas. All the family, all the aunts, my godfather and my uncle, they were silent screen stars and so on. So we did wonderful plays in the sitting room. We had a niche in the sitting room by a bay window with a roller blind at the back. And we used to do plays in this niche. And the extraordinary thing was the very first play that I ever did was in that niche, working with these eminent people of the theatre. And when my daughter Dariel, who's now an actor, when she made her first appearance on a stage, the house that I was brought up in had been turned into a nursery school, and she went to this nursery school, and you would never believe it, but I've got a movie of her doing her first play as a tiny mite in the niche that I did my first play in. Wasn't that an extraordinary thing? That's true. My father had just come back from Hollywood. He'd been working over there as a scenarist, and he'd been having a lot of fun at William Randolph Hearst's ranch, San Simeon. You know, you've seen all about that when you saw the film Citizen Kane with Orson Welles. And he used to invite just a few guests to spend the weekend with him, like 250 people, something of that nature. And he would sit at one end of the dinner table. His mistress, Marion Davis, the silent screen star, would sit at the other end of the table, which was about as long as from here to the end of the theatre, which was a very intimate gathering of friends. You know. Amazing people used to go there, and I've got a movie, actually, of my father getting into the swimming pool on the shoulders of Buster Keaton, and Buster Keaton went down the steps with my father on his shoulder, and he walked the whole length of the swimming pool and up the other side with my father, and never paused for breath. It's the most extraordinary thing. They're very strange people. Very, very odd. I must tell you, this particular day, they had a very unusual thing happen. They had a lot of nubile young ladies who decided to go topless. Horrors. I mean, in those days, can you believe it? I mean, we're talking about the early 30s. Topless ladies in swimming pools. Well, my father, funnily enough, had a movie camera with him. And so he said, this is an opportunity not to be missed. We must show it for the Christmas show when I get back home. And so he filmed the show in the swimming pool at San Simeon. And when we got back for Christmas, he just said, I'm going to show you a marvellous little show now. Nubile topless ladies. And the only place we could show it was the niche on the roller blind. And he showed it, and it was sort of successful. The uncles and Larry Olivier and everybody, hooray, and the aunts. You know, not very, but it was an enormous success with the 300 people outside on the street who'd seen it on the roller blind. Anyway, my father married again. He'd married a lady called Dorothy. I didn't care for her at all. She was the sort of proverbial stepmother as far as I was concerned. And so when they went down to Devonshire to live, we had a house on the River Exe down in Dulverton, near Tiverton. It was a great life, really, for a boy. We had a farm, and we had horses for hunting. We had the house on the top of a hill, and the farm was below. Mr. and Mrs. Brumfield run the farm, and they had a regiment of children. That is a mass production system. And Mrs. Brumfield and he, they'd be at collecting the carrots or something, you see, and she'd say, excuse me, my dear, I've just got to pop into the house for a minute, have the child, and I'll be back in a moment. And she'd go back to the house and plop, she'd have the baby. And she'd come back to the house, oh, there you are, dear, you've got another little daughter. I said, now, where did you put them carrots? And they'd be off again. An amazing couple of people, the Broomfields, and they looked after the farm with the horses, and our house was up on the top of the hill, and the postman used to come, and he used to deliver letters for miles around to the farms. He'd walked the equivalent of 4 times round the world in gumboots. So you can imagine the condition of his feet. On his way in, he used to call into the pubs, you see, and have a few pints of scrumpy. And so, by the time he got to our house, he'd had a few, you see. And he used to look up at the house on the top of the hill, and he'd look and he'd say, oh, bugger, I ain't going up there. Boy, no, I ain't going up there. Let them young bastards come down and get it. And with that, he'd take the letters and he'd throw them over the gate into the field, into the mud. And my father would be looking through his binoculars and said, good God, the damn man's done it again. And he said, go on, boys. He said, down you go, a penny each to each, collecting the mail and bringing it up. And so we ran down and said, righto, Dad. And we got a hold of him, Mr. Willacombe, and we said, yeah, Mr. Willacombe, would you mind throwing the letters in the mud every day? Because, you see, if we pick them up out of the mud, we get a penny each, you see. So we did a deal. And he said, oh, go here, I'll climb in, and you throw it in the mud, and we go down and get it and get the threepence. Now, he'd had a rather too many scrumpies, and he wasn't too fit. So they got another postman, and they hauled him out of retirement. And he was extremely old. He was 83. And he had his old hat that he'd been using. And one of them 4-peak-and-a-half hats. Do you remember? Anybody remember him? The little postman's hat, the little thing, that hard hat. Well, his name was Pa Curtis, and he was over 80, and he had eyebrows that stuck up there like that. And Pa Curtis said, Coral, he said, I'm going to be the fastest postman into West Country. He said, don't worry about that. He said, I'm going to be faster than Willacombe in his gumboots. I get a bike. And he bought a racing bike. 83 years of age, he bought a racing bike with bent handlebars and a very hard saddle. And he used to deliver the letters at enormous speed. And one day he disappeared. We couldn't find him anywhere. And I said, where's Pa Curtis? They said, haven't you heard? Oh, he said, he's had a terrible accident. He said, he was going up Studley Hill, he said, against the wind. He said, his head down, his ass in the air, pedaling away up the hill. He said, and he bent down so far, he got his eyebrows caught in the front spokes. He said, hand him off, quick as a trice, he said. He said, he's in the hospital. And so I went to see him, and I said, Pa, what have you done? Or he said, I was going too fast, he said, Master John, too fast. And I said, well, I'll tell you something, Pa, I'll give you a good bit of news. I said, I've just put on the air, on a radio show, I've got a postman. And I call him Postman Curtis. And I said, and it's all based on you. So when you listen and you hear an old man say, wow, what does it matter what you do, so long as you tear him up? That's you. Do you remember that character? Do you? Yeah, a long time ago. Waterlog Spa with Eric Barker, and that was based on old Pa Curtis. Now, we used to have horses. I told you, we used to go hunting. The Devon and Somerset Staghounds or the Tiverton Staghounds. Now, I used to hunt on a little tiny Shetland pony called Shadow. And you went to the meat. You had to hack to the meat. Like this. Very exhausting. And then for the rest of the day, you'd be hunting. Even more exhausting. When you wanted to get home, he was keen to go home. It was like riding a vibrator, I'm telling you. It was an awful experience. The soles of my feet were worn out from scraping along the road. And so I said, well, the only thing to do, I have to buy another horse. And my father said, well, go to Bampton Fair. He said, if you go there, you can get one for 5 shillings. 5 bob, that's true. And I bought my first good hunting pony, an Exmoor pony, for 5 shillings. I remember I went to the man that I bought it from, and I said, excuse me, sir. He said, yes. I said, I bought this horse from you. He said, yes. And I said, how do I get it home? He said, you bought it, I don't give a bugger how you get it home. Put a bit of rope round his neck, he said, and tow him. And I did, we towed it in a car. We towed it all the way back. We were leaping up and down, but we got it home and it made a very fine hunting pony. One of the masters of the Devon and Somerset staghounds was the Colonel Lewson Gore, a great First World War hero. He had lost the sight of one eye, had a black patch, and he'd lost an arm in the same action, and he lost a leg. So he had only one leg and one arm and a black patch. And his groom, Torsten, he used to strap him for the day onto the horse, because he couldn't hold on with one leg, you see. It was very difficult with one arm. And of course, naturally, halfway through the day, he'd get taken short, and he'd say, "Torsten, come on." He said, "Behind the hedge up." He said, "Yes, sir." And they went behind the thicket, you see, and he said, "Right, anybody about?" He said, "No, sir." He said, "Right then, come on." And so Torsten undid the flap of the Colonel's riding breeches, and he put the hand in to get the naughty bits out, you see, and over the side he would go and relieve himself, and perfectly normal, understandable. And he said, "Right out, Torsten, come up, back, come up, come up." And back would go, and he'd do him up, and away he'd go. Well, this particular day, he said, "Torsten, come up, and behind the thicket here, behind, come on, man, come on, quick. And so Torsten said, "Yes, sir." And he went there, and he undid the flap, and he put the hand in, and he said, come on, man, hurry up." He said, I'm being as quick as I can, sir." He said, "What's the matter? What's the trouble, man?" He said, "I'm very sorry, sir." He said, "I can't find it." He said, "Can't find it? Good God, man, you had it last." Now, Colonel Lewson Gore, wonderful man. Great days of hunting those were, great days, real days. While I was there, I was rather unhappy at home, so I decided that I'd do what everybody does, and a lot of kids that are unhappy at home, they sort of run away and join a circus. And actually, there was one to join. Lord John Sanger, his name was. It was a great circus that toured the West Country. So I rushed off, and I went to see Lord John Sanger, and I said, "Excuse me, my lord, have you by any chance got a job you could give me in your circus during my holidays?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, lad. What can you do?" Yeah, a real lord, obviously. He said, "What can you do, lad?" And I said, "Well, I can't do anything, actually." He said, "Well, it's not much bloody good to me, is it? Can't do nothing." "Oh, wait a minute," he said. "Oh, I got it, yes. You came on a motorbike, didn't you?" And I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "Right then. Go and see Captain Arthur Overland." He said, "And tell him I sent you and ask for a job." I said, "What does he do?" He said, "He rides the Wall of Death." Ah, yeah, now you know what the Wall of Death is, don't you? It's a great big enormous cup of wood, almost as big as this theatre, and you ride motorbikes round inside it, up and down, and you sit sideways and you do all sorts of show. Actually, it's very easy because it's just like going uphill all the time, rather quickly uphill. Don't look to the right, you get giddy and you throw up over your audience, so it's not a very good idea. Anyway, I went there, and to begin with, I just sat in the leathers on the side of the Indian motorbikes, and I'd go, you know, as they do with the... Do you remember, any of you, that magnificent sensation, the smell of Castrol R? Ah. Oh, you do know what I mean, don't you? Those of you that don't, it's like Chanel No. 5 to a man. The smell of Castrol R was marvellous, and I used to make all these wonderful smells, and everybody would go, like Bisto ads, you know. And then they would go in and watch the Wall of Death. Well, one day a fella came up to me and he said, "Here, John, can I have a word?" So I said, "Yes." He said, "Would you like to buy a lion?" I said, "What?" He said, "Would you like to buy a lion?" He said, "Because we've got Leo, you see, and he's no bloody good to us," he said. "He's lost all his teeth." He said, "He don't frighten nobody." He goes, "Ah." He said, "That's useless for us," he said. He said, "Well, I thought with that little baby Austin that you use for going around for the publicity, putting up the posters and things, I thought what a good idea for you to get the lion in the back of the baby Austin and ride him round the Wall of Death." Take a lion round the Wall of Death? Are you out of your mind? "No," he said, "it's a bloody good idea." He said, "You'll be the only one doing it." So I had a word with Leo, and he agreed, and so we taught him to go round the Wall of Death on the back of a baby Austin. We strapped his face together so he went, because it'd be no good going, people seeing the gums. Unfortunately, though, Leo died in the Wall of Death. Try getting a 2-ton lion a dead one out of a wall of death. Very difficult it was, I tell you. I've had a hernia ever since. Now, of course, during this period of time I was at school. Not for very long at any school. That's the story of my life, really. I was expelled from everything. I went to a school called Aldro at Eastbourne, and I'd just been to see a Tarzan film. And so when one day I was sitting in the lavatory lines, and there are lots of little loos, little loos about this big, all in a line. There were no walls or doors or anything like that. I never quite understood why, not then anyway, but I understand now. And there they were, lines of little loos with chains above them. And I'd just been to see a Tarzan film. And I looked up and I saw all these chains and I thought, yeah, great. And so I leapt hold of the first chain. And I swung on chain 2 and made it. And I swung on chain 3 and I fell right into the loo with my leg jammed in the U-pipe. And they had to get a plumber. And the plumber took hours to get me out. And the headmaster was standing there doing this. I cannot believe this. The effrontery of this boy. How dare you behave like that? Go and change into your gym shorts and get into the quad. I'm going to thrash you. And so I went into the quad and I received 6 of the best from the headmaster. He couldn't stand up to this heinous villain. I was 7.5 years of age. 7.5 years of age and was beaten and thrashed for swinging on a lavatory chain. Still, I had great fun. I really enjoyed it. I went to another school after that, which I enjoyed. There was a headmaster called P.C. Underhill. He weighed about 22 stone, an ex-rowing blue. He didn't beat you with a cane, he beat you with a 5s bat. So with 22 stone behind him, when he hit you with the 5 bat, your head went straight through the wall opposite. But the extraordinary thing was I liked him. I liked him. Through my life, I've sort of liked the most extraordinary people who are fierce and supposed to be bad and supposed to be angry and supposed to frighten you, and they don't. And I liked him. I wasn't expelled from there. I went to Sherborne Public School after that. Hated that. Hated the whole system of fagging. Hated everybody in it. There were 2 guys that were bullies, and they used to destroy things that I'd made for my parents. And they used to strap me into my bed at night at the last day of term and tar and feather me. They're really good laughs, I really enjoyed it, I tell you. It was wonderful. And they put me in a basket and put tuck boxes on top of it, and I'd be in there for 2-3 hours, Very good for a little boy, very good. When they left, I sent them letters, and I said, you think you've got away with that, but you haven't. I'll get you yet. Watch out, I'll get you, I'll have my revenge. And I signed it, the Black Hand. Can you imagine a more stupid thing to do? Sending letters to 2 bully boys and saying, I'll get you yet, the Black Hand. Now, the extraordinary thing was that years and years and years later, when I was a very fit young sailor in submarines and very, very good condition, I was going up to the Café Royal to have a drink at Harry's bar. And while I was walking up there with the 6 of my lower deck mates, across the other side of the road I saw Brown, one of the 2 bullies. And I went, ho, 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 ho. And he crossed the road and he went into Harry's bar. And that's where we went. And I went in and I said to him, excuse me. He said, yes. I said, do you remember me? And he said, no, I don't think so. I said, that's good, and hit him. And I knocked 3 of his teeth out, and I knocked him right off the bar stool. And it took my 4 or 5 mates about 20 minutes to get me off him. They didn't try very hard, but they... So I said, now listen, now you remember me, don't you? I told you I'd get you. I'm the Black Hand. You tell your friend Roberts the same thing's going to happen to him if ever I see him about. You never believe it. I mean, this is a ridiculous story. But exactly a month later, I was on leave again with the same bunch of lads. We were going down to the tea dance at the Piccadilly Hotel, and walking past Simpson's up the other way was the other one. And I said, oh, ho, ho, ho. And my mate said, oh, Christ, not again. And I said, yes, follow me. And we chased him, and we ran him all the way down Lower Regent Street, and we ran him through the park. And we ran him into the ground, and I was just about to pounce on him when he tripped, and he fell. And so we rushed up to grab him, to pull him up, and 2 old ladies said, oh, they're nice, those sailors, aren't they? Do you see that poor fella? He fell over, and that sailor leapt up and he helped him up. Wasn't that nice, is it? Well, it's damn all I could do after that. And so he said, remember, the Black Hand will get you yet. I never saw them again, ever. That was Sherborne. I was expelled from Sherborne because I did a great and original thing which went into the history books. I beat my fag master. Instead of him beating me, I beat him. And my father decided the best thing to do was to superannuate me and remove me and send me to another school. I went to a co-educational school with girls. What a splendid arrangement. I did enjoy myself. I built an open-air theatre there. I learnt languages there. I had a marvellous time. A wonderful life. Frensham Heights. I thoroughly recommend it. A great house and a great, great school. I rode a motorbike there once, and I drove it straight into a wall within 15 minutes of buying it. As I hit the wall, I went over the wall and hit into the middle of a tea party. And somebody said, "Oh, hello, you're late." That was a wonderful, original line. And this man very kindly picked me up and he took me back to the school because I was rather a mess. And there was a bit of bone sticking out of my finger, still does. He said to the headmaster, the poor chap, he was riding his bicycle down the hill and it came unstuck and he ran into a wall. Oh, the headmaster said, "What bad luck, thank you so much for bringing him back." I left at the end of term and we all lined up to say goodbye to the headmaster, and I got to him and he said, "Well, goodbye, John. Very nice to have had the opportunity of knowing you. Oh, there is one thing I would like to say." He said, for God's sake, do be more careful on that motorbike," which I thought showed that he was a really first-class teacher. He knew all along that I'd had a motorbike and that I'd run into it. The very strange thing is when I took Sean to Pierpont School, which was his school just round the corner, just as we were driving by for the first day up to his house where he was living, I said, "Stop. I know this corner." He said, "No, you don't." I said, "Yes, I do. Stop." And we got out of the car and we went over to this flint wall, and there was a bit of flint and brick knocked out where my motorcycle had hit it. And I said, "That's where I had tea." And Sean said, "Are you putting me on?" I said, "No, that's the very place. That's still there. It still needs repairing after all those years." I left school. I decided the best thing I was doing going to the theatre. Everybody else in my family had been in the theatre, of course. And so I decided that I'd try to get into a dramatic school. And I said, I'll go to the Central School where Laurence Olivier had gone with Elsie Fogarty. And I went to see her for an audition piece and a test. And she said, "Oh, I'll come in, dear." She had an extraordinary voice for a teaching lady. She said, "It's a tiny little thing." Tiny she was. And she said, "Right, dear," she said, "get that chair." So I got the chair and I stood. "No," she said, "don't you stand on it, it's for me." And so she got up on the chair and she got a roll of newspaper. She said, "Open your mouth, dear." And I opened my mouth and she shoved the roll of newspaper in my gob. And she said, "Right, dear, go on, bite on that." And I bit. And she looked at the bite and she said, "Oh, no. Oh, no, dear. No. Oh, no, you've got a deformed mouth, dear." She said, "You'd never be any good at the theatre." She said, "You can't even speak properly." She said, "You lisp." She said, "I do. My tongue was far too big for my teeth. My tongue goes through my teeth when I say a letter S. Your tongue goes behind your teeth, but mine didn't." And so she said, "Oh, no, dear, no future in the theatre." And so that I left. I thought, that's it. I wasn't in the theatre long. Just long enough to stand up on a chair and have a roll of newspaper shoved in my face. So I said, "All right, well, I have to go somewhere else. I'll go to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art." Oh, I thought I'll get in there. Yeah, sure I will. Mark you, my father was a governor, so I did stand a little chance. So I went to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and I hadn't been there more than 2 terms before I was sent for by the principal, Sir Kenneth Barnes. And he said, "Pertwee, I'm going to tell you, I'm very much afraid that I'm going to fire you." And I said, "Why?" He said, "I have been speaking to your Greek teacher, Mrs. Wheeler, and she tells me that you have refused to be a wind." I said, "Well, yes, it's perfectly true. I have refused to be a wind. I mean, it's pretty silly. My father paying all this money for my education in the theatre, and all I've got to do is go, ooh, ooh, that's what you do as a Greek wind. Ooh, hundreds of you lining the side going, ooh." And I said, "No, I don't want to be a Greek wind. I want to be an actor." And he said, "You'll be a wind and like it." And I said, "No, I'm sorry." And he said, "Very well. You will leave at the end of this term." So I thought I didn't last there long. I did a play at the end of that term. In that play, as all students, you play more than one part. I played the part of the man who was murdered in the first act, and I played the part of the detective who found out who murdered me in the last. I had great makeup. Her hair parted in the middle, little tash and a monocle, for the first character, and then the detective, the dirty old raincoat and the battered hat and everything. And I was really rather proud of myself. And there were only 2 very small parts. But when it was over, Kenneth Barnes said to Noel Coward, who was the guest of honour, and he said, was there... Did you think that? Did you find any talent? Did you? Were you impressed? Did you? Did you like? Did you? And Noel Coward just very interesting, very, very good performance from a man who played the part of the man who was murdered in the first act. And I particularly liked the part of the detective who found out who murdered him at the last. Well, having played both parts, I was naturally very thrilled, and so I leapt forward and gave him a kiss, and very dangerous thing to do. But as he was a sort of guru of mine, a sort of godfather of mine, a great friend of my dad's, it was all right, and he was a great influence on my life in the theatre from then on, and I actually had the joy of working with him. Amazing wit, that lovely story about Noel Coward when he was watching the coronation. And it was a terrible day in the coronation, you may remember, some of you. It was pouring with rain, and the Queen wanted to be in the open carriage, and she couldn't because she'd been soaked. And everybody would have been soaked, so they were all in the carriages sort of doing this, through the windows, and all the crowd was sitting out in the rain. It was awful. It was a heartbreaking day. But Noel Coward was sitting in a grandstand, covered and quite dry. And all the carriages went by, and when he and his friend were looking and saying, very good, very boring. And suddenly an open carriage went by with a lady in it, a vast lady, Queen Salotti of Tonga. And she'd melted. All the rain had melted her, and her hat hung down like spaniel's ears. And sitting opposite to her was a little man in a top hat and a morning coat, and he'd melted too. But she was beaming and smiling all over her face, and she was waving to everybody. The crowd went mad. They thought, what a marvellous woman. And so this man, he didn't know who she was, this friend of Noel Coward's. He said, no, extraordinary woman. Who on earth is that? And he said, oh, don't you know, my dear boy? That's the Queen of Tonga. He said, isn't she marvellous? Who's the little man sitting opposite to her? Noel Coward said, her lunch. No. I then joined a thing called the Arts League of Service Travelling Theatre, which was a bus with all the scenery on the top of the bus and all the actors and actresses on the bottom of the bus. And we did a programme of 150 items, and they were able to choose 10 items wherever we went, a different place every single night. They chose 10 items, but 2 had to be extracts from the classics. And we stayed with the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker. You never knew who we were going to stay with. It was wonderful. And I learnt an enormous amount. It was directed by Donald Wolfett, the last tour. Great, great actor. Wonderful story about Donald Wolfett. He'd been touring, as he did all the time. They said Laurence Olivier was a tour de force, and Donald Wolfett was forced to tour. But he was a wonderful actor, with best leer in the business, I think. One day he was playing up in the north, and he said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your magnificent reception of the piece tonight. Next week, we will be performing the Bard's Hamlet. I shall be playing the part of the prince, and my wife, Rosalind Iden, will be playing the part of the queen. And as he said that, a voice from the back of the gallery said, your wife's a friggin' old tart. Nobody had ever heard anything like that before, never. They were thunderstruck. And Donald Wolfett, without pause, looked up and said, nevertheless. Wouldn't you love to have said something like that? I think that's wonderful. Nevertheless, I joined Brighton Repertory Company, where I was paid the grand sum of £3 10 shillings per week. I lived in digs. They cost me 30 shillings, £1 10 shillings, and I had 3 meals a day. And on Sundays, the lady, Madame Penisson's lover, was the chief chef from Frascati's restaurant in London. And he came down on the last train, and we used to go to catch him. And then he had a big basket filled with smoked salmon and caviar and half bottles of claret and duck and the most beautiful food ever. And we used to tow this thing back to number 13 Victoria Street, and on Sundays we'd have a great nosh. And my parents used to say, why don't you ever come home at the weekends? I said, are you mad? With all that wonderful food? No way. This is where I learnt my love of good food and wine from the penny stores. 30 bob. It cost me to live like that. Wonderful. We did twice nightly, twice weekly with matinees. Let me explain what that is. We did 2 plays a week, not 1 play a week, 2 plays a week. We rehearsed Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, and we put the play on the Thursday. So you did Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 1 play, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, another play. But of course we did twice nightly. You did 6 o'clock and 8:30 performances, and you did a matinee on a Wednesday and a matinee on a Saturday. So you had Monday morning, Monday afternoon, and 2 performances, Tuesday morning, Tuesday afternoon, 2 performances, Wednesday morning, a matinee, and 2 performances. On a Thursday, you had to put on the play you'd been rehearsing the week before. That was not easy. Not easy. You had to hypnotize yourself in order to learn the lines, and we did. We used to get a sheet of black card and put a pinhole in it with a candle, and you looked at it, and when it opened up, that was when your subconscious mind was opening, and then it would close, and you concentrate like mad on that page, and when you woke up about 20 minutes later, you knew that page pretty well. It was like an extraordinary photograph on your brain. This was fine as long as somebody gave you the right cue. If they gave you the wrong cue, you looked at this blank page, you said, what the bloody hell did he say there? It's got nothing whatever to do with it. You get it confused with all sorts of things. We were doing a play called Love from a Stranger, and I played the gardener. And I had a green baize apron, and I had a spade beard, and a terrible gnarled face, and an old battered hat, and a corncob pipe. And I rushed down onto the stage, and the head of the company said, hello, and what are you supposed to be? And I said, I'm the gardener in Love from a Stranger. He said, are you? Well, we're playing Candida, you are the vicar, and you're supposed to be on the stage now. Oh, my God. Quickly rubbed the makeup into the face, tore the beard off, put the head round the corner of the door, saying, I'm terribly sorry to keep you waiting. I've been doing a little gardening, having a bit of trouble with the boll weevil. Would you take some tea? And then a poor little stage manager girl will come in and say, tea, madam? Milk and sugar? Would you like a biscuit? Anything to keep things going while I was up in the dressing room going mad, trying to get the right makeup on. But this is the sort of thing you had to do when you were in repertory companies like that. In the interval one day I went up on top and there was a very sallow-skinned little wizened gentleman. He looked rather sick and I said, can I get you a cup of coffee? He said, oh, thank you so much. And I gave him a cup of coffee and he had a companion that was always with him. A very unfriendly chap he was. And this little man and I became great friends, and every single day I'd go out and make him a cup of coffee and take him one, and we'd sit and we'd talk about all sorts of things. He was very interested in the theatre. He didn't tell me anything about himself. And I didn't know who he was, but I became very fond of him. And then one day he disappeared. I couldn't find him. He didn't appear at all. And 3 or 4 days later, I opened my newspaper, and there on the front page was a picture. And it said, yesterday, His Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie took luncheon with King George. And there was a photograph of my little friend who sat on the end of the pier having cups of coffee with me. And he'd never, ever said that he was a king. And it was a terribly sad thing that I was never able to see him again, because unfortunately he came to a very sad end, dear little man. I went to Jersey Repertory Company with Val Blanchard, who eventually became MacDonald Hobley, and Peter Glenville, Sean Glenville's son, and Dorothy Ward's son, playing the leading man. I, fooling about, came in through the door as the vicar, and I said, oh, here, this is for you, and I pressed a fresh egg into his hand. Terribly funny. The audience thought it was hysterical. Wonderfully funny. He didn't think it was at all funny. And so he wrote a letter to the head of the company, J. Baxter Somerville, and said that he wasn't going to tolerate this raving idiot any longer. Unfortunately, J. Baxter Somerville came over the next day to see what I was up to, and he landed on the beach at Bully Bay in an aeroplane. There was no airstrip in Jersey in those days. And he came to see the show, and at that precise minute I'd done something even worse. We were doing a play with Lord Peter Wimsey, and Lord Peter Wimsey was explaining how the murder was done, which was the murderer had taken a brass pot with an aspidestra in it, had pulled it back on its chain and fixed it, and then, when the man that he was killing had gone up the stairs, he cut the wire, and the pot went smack and crushed the skull of the poor man who was murdered. And so he made this up by putting a pot of aspidestras on one of those China Victorian things. He said, that's the poor victim. And he took the weight back. And he said, and now I will show you how it was done. And he cut the rope and it went whoop, whoop. It's about that much away. Whoop, whoop. And the audience were hysterical. I was hysterical because I had shifted the dead up there about 6 inches. Well, what a laugh. Until J. Baxter Somerville came round afterwards and said, yes, very, very funny, Pertwee, very funny. You're out. And I was duly fired. Amazing thing, though, about that was that I was the first naval officer into Jersey after it had been recaptured from the Germans, and I went to the Springfield Theatre just to take a look around the second day after we'd taken over Jersey again. And I went in, and there were a lot of German prisoners of war about. There was one line only of flour bags, and I said, move that lot, because that's where the scene bay was behind, and they moved it. And I went in through the door, and there was this scene bay filled with all the props and the furniture and the scenery and everything of J. Baxter Somerville. Now, the Germans had been there and they had no fuel at all. They burnt everything. They cut practically every tree down. But they never knew that was because they covered it up with sacks of grain, and they were down to the last line. And I'd managed to save it. So I rang up JB and I said, JB, Pertwee. He said, oh, yes. And I said, do you want to give me a job after the war? He said, no. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, would you like to know something good? And he said, yes. And I said, all your scenery in Jersey is perfect. It's all there. I've seen it all. It was protected by a line of grain sacks. He said, was it? Do you want a job after the war? I never took him up on it because better things happened, I'm glad to say. I was walking down the street one day when I ran into an actor called Jon Pertwee, and Jon Pertwee said, you speak West Country, don't you? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, nip up to this studio in Bond Street. He said, go there. And he said, no, when you're in there, just say that I'm terribly sorry I can't turn up today because I'm filming at Pinewood. And I've sent you instead. And so I went up, and the producer was furious. He said, what the hell's he talking? Who the hell does he think he is? He said, I don't just get people off the street. I said, no, as a matter of fact, I said, I am known to the son of the man who owns the company, and I can do the voice. He said, you can? I said, yes. He said, go on, do it. And so luckily it was a West Country farmer. Right? He said, that's no problem at all. There's a show called Marmaduke Brown, with Ernest Clark played the lead, played Marmaduke Brown. So I did it, and they said, yeah, that's all right. That's not bad at all. He said, you got the job. And so I did it, and I played the gardener in Marmaduke Brown. I rushed back home, and I phoned my agent, and I said, Morris? He said, yes. And I said, I've got good news. He said, oh, yes. And I said, Jon Pertwee, I met in the street. He said, yes, I know. And I said, and he sent me there, and I've got the job. He said, yes, I know. And I said, well, what else do you know? He said, I know that you've got every other job Mr. Selous does there. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're doing Mr. Reader, you're doing Stella Dallas, you're doing Young Widow Jones, you're doing all of them. That could make 25 programs a week, and you're paid 2 guineas a program. You're going to make a lot of money, young man. And I said, well, you don't sound very happy about this. He said, I'm not. And I said, why? He said, I handle Jon Pertwee as well. That was unfortunate, but I didn't care. And I worked on Radio Luxembourg more or less up to the start of the war. I was in a play called To Kill a Cat. Unfortunately, the producer was of a certain persuasion, which I wasn't. So he touched me up, and I said, don't do that. Because if you do, I'll knock you into the orchestra pit. And he did it again, and I knocked him into the orchestra pit. Not a good idea when you're starting off in the theatre. Not a good idea at all. He was injured, and so I was fired. I was expelled once again. And so I thought, well, what else can I do? I'll join the services. The war had started. And so I said, what am I going to join? I'm not going to join the Air Force. I'm too frightened to join the Air Force. How anybody could ever do what pilots did, I never know. The bravery, people getting into a plane and going out and flying over enemy territory night after night, amazing courage. I wasn't going to join the army because I'd had nightmares about trenches and rats and bayonets and things, because I was born in 1919, just after the First World War, and so I thought, no, not for me. I'll join the Navy. Yes, because you're a long way away from the enemy. If you go into action, you're a long way away, and they might miss. And also, the food isn't bad. And it wasn't, because when I was in the Navy, I was actually in action in the North Sea. And we were in action, fighting a war, and somebody said, "Righto, Pee-wee, grubs up," and I dropped what I was doing and went down and had a hot meal. Did you get that in the Army or the Air Force? And that's firing a gun that's almost red hot, you know. Righto, Pee-wee, grubs up. Wonderful. And also, of course, not to forget, all the nice girls love a sailor. I forgot that I was desperately seasick, even on the round pond. I was terribly seasick. I was in submarines to begin the war. That's a very uncomfortable movement. And I was a wireless operator in a tiny caboose, and I'm 6'2.5". And every time the captain said, "Pertwee," I said, "Sir!" and I banged my head on every bulkhead, and I went round a piece of sticking plaster on my forehead, And the captain said, "Good God, that wound of yours is taking a long time to heal, isn't it?" I said, "I haven't got a wound, sir." He said, "And why are you wearing that sticking plaster?" I said, "So I won't get one, sir." And he said, "Nevertheless, take that sticking plaster off. I'll get you transferred." And so they took me out of submarines, and they put me into battle cruisers, and they put me into a ship called HMS Hood. And HMS Hood was the biggest battle cruiser in the British fleet. It did 42 knots. It weighed 43,000 tons. It had a complement of 1,768 men. And I was in Russian convoys. And believe me, that was tough. It was very cold. It wasn't as tough as people in hard-lying ships like destroyers and things like that. But there wasn't even room for me to sling my hammock. I used to sleep on a bench, sideways, with my head on a sailor's cap. But I never fell off. I could balance myself on it and going through an amazing sea. Seas, I promise you, that were 85 feet high. And that's no lie. And when you get 42,000 tons going whap, and you didn't go over the top, you went into the middle, and then it came out the other end, and then down on the sea, and spray would shoot over the ship. And I was in the spotting top. I was a spotter up in the spotting top, covered in about 18 overcoats and about 7 hats and balaclava helmets. And when it went down like that and the spray went, I used to duck down quick because the water froze instantly and turned itself into icicles. And can you imagine a more ridiculous way of dying than being stabbed to death by an icicle? That's what would have happened, believe me. And we were up in Russian convoys, and then the Wolfpack submarines came out, because the spotting aeroplanes used to come round and round the Focke-Wulfs, go round and round and round. And our gunnery officer had a great sense of humour. And he was looking up at this aeroplane once we were off Murmansk and Archangel, and the plane was going round and round and round. And he said, "Hey, you up there, Fritz, for God's sake go round the other way, boy, you're making us dizzy." And we thought, that's a very funny man. And back came an answer from the German pilot, said, "Certainly, anything to oblige the British," and did. You would not believe it. In the early days, there was a certain sense of humour. They soon forgot all about the sense of humour after the war had been on a couple of years. On another occasion, I remember we were firing at a Focke-Wulf, and it was ridiculous because the plane was there, and we didn't get up that high, but going boom, 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 boom. Again, our signals officer sent up this message and said to the pilot, "Hey, you up there, how's that?" And back came the answer from the German pilot, "Not out." Now, unfortunately, as you all probably know, the Hood came unstuck. She sailed into action against the Bismarck, the biggest battleship in the world, and the fastest, and the Hood was quick, but she'd had her magazine hatch covers made into very thin ones and make her light enough to catch the Bismarck, because she was quick. It was an unhappy ship because we never believed that it would take much of a whack, that it would probably explode. And what happened as we were closing in, I was a CW candidate, and which meant that I was an officer candidate. My captain had sent for me and said, "Tell me about Radio Luxembourg." And I said, "Oh, do you really want to know?" So he said, "Yes, I've always wanted to know. How do you do it?" And I told him for 20 minutes. He said, "Right, okay, that's lovely." And I said, "Excuse me, what was that all about?" He said, "Oh, you just passed your CW candidates course thing. You know, that's your interview." I said, "Oh, thank you very much indeed, sir. Does that mean I can go?" And he said, "Yes, you can go." I didn't realize that when he said you can go, that I was going to be over the side of that ship. And I was down over grappling ropes, and I went down the netting, and I went into a drifter, and I was taken off to a ship called the Dunluce Castle back at Scapa Flow. And the Hood just sailed on, and it got the first shell into the Bismarck. Bismarck then got the range of Hood, and the awful thing was the very first shell hit the Daylight Workshop flat underneath the bridge, and all the upper guns crews had all closed up in that because they weren't going to be used, the high-angle guns. And the whole lot were killed, and practically everybody was killed on the bridge as well. One 16-inch shell right in the middle. The man in the spotting top where I used to work, he was a signalman Briggs, and he was blown out, and he was blown, presumably, into the sea. And one midshipman Dundas, he went like this, and he went through the window of the bridge and slid across the deck and into the sea, as far as he remembers. He doesn't remember very much about it. Now, there was one man on the upper gun deck, leading seaman Tilburn. He was the killick of my mess. And he was sitting with two mates behind a UP projectile locker, sitting there. And the next salvo landed between the stacks, right in the middle, and went, and it blew his two friends to pieces either side of him and killed them instantly. And he wasn't scratched, which is an extraordinary thing a blast does. So he jumped from the upper gun deck, which is about as high as those lights, right down onto the forecastle. And he tore off one sea boot. And at that precise minute, the third salvo landed forward of X turret, A, B, X, Y. And it went straight down through two wooden decks, hit the armored deck, exploded, and because of these thin hatch covers, they just blew in, and the blast went down, hit the magazine, and whoosh, the ship exploded. It went down in 9.5 seconds. 1,768 men died, and 3 survived, leading seaman Tilburn, the midshipman Dundas, and signalman Briggs. This was a dreadful thing, and of course I was absolutely heartbroken about this, because I lost all my friends and my mates, and it was a dreadful thing to happen. And when I got back, all the letters from my parents had been returned saying the addressee of this envelope is missing, presumed killed. And so therefore, when I arrived in the flat and opened the door and said, "Hi, Dad," he said, "Oh, no." My father's sense of humour. Well, we went then from then on survivor's leave, and I went down to Portsmouth Barracks as a CW candidate. And while I was at the CW candidate, I met up with a man called Chief Petty Officer Branch, who used to say, "Righto, lads, right, let's have it." And it was one of these people that everybody was frightened of. And he said, "Righto, come on in, Pee-wee, come here." My God, he said, "Get your bloody haircut, you look like a bleeding chrysanthemum." And I corpsed, and I started to laugh. He said, "What are you laughing at?" And I said, "What, you, sir?" He said, What are you laughing at me for? I'm not supposed to be funny." I said, "Well, you are, sir, you're very funny." He said, "You're supposed to be frightened of me." And I said, "Well, I'm not, sir." He said, "Well, try, for Christ's sake." He said, "Right, get all these men and march down the end of the parade ground and turn them about." So I said, "Right, squad, by the left, quick, march." And off they went. And when they were gone about the length of this theatre, I said, "Squad, oh!" He said, "Well, what, you wait for it, I'll tell you when." And I said, "But can I?" He said, "I'll tell you when." And so they were disappearing, almost out of sight. And I said, "Squad!" He said, "Not yet. I'll tell you when." Oh, my God. And I really clutched the gluteals and said, "Squad, about, turn." Now, the men at the back heard me. They turned about. The ones in the middle thought I said right turn, and they went that way. The ones on the left went that way, and the ones at the front heard nothing, and they went straight on. "Oh, dear, oh, dear, oh, dear." He said, "Come on, get them back together, lad." And so I said, "Squad, about, turn." And this they all heard, and they all turned, and... And Chief Petty Officer Branch said, "Yes. Well, now I know what they mean when they say Marines will advance in columns of 4s and matelots in frigging great heaps." I love that man. Weeks later, I was in G Block in Portsmouth Barracks, and I was fire watching. And an incendiary bomb came through the roof, and I put a sandbag on the top, and I jumped on it to put it out, which is very stupid, because it went through the ceiling into the hammocks and started a raging inferno, and there were 6 of us up there, and we were going to be barbecued. And so I said, "Right, everybody out, lads," and they all went down the ladder, and I was the last out, and I looked to see if there were any more, and there weren't, so I came down the ladder. At that precise minute, the Germans dropped a landmine on a parachute at the end of the building. It blew up the regulating petty officers' block. It killed many RPOs, and it blew the end of our building off. The blast came in, hit the wall, sucked me out, which blast does extraordinary things, and I went backwards through this mess room with the girders going over my head, and I went out of the hole at the end of the building and landed, bang, in the middle of all the rubble of the exploded and the blown up building. Well, I mean, I was in a terrible state. I was covered in blood, I was black, I was deaf, and when the men came round with the paddy wagons and with the stretchers, and they found me on the top of the building, obviously I was dead. So they picked me up and they put me on the stretcher, and they took me over to the officers' mess, and they took me into the mortuary, and the mortuary was the larder. They thought, what a good idea, nice marble slabs, very good, we'll put all the dead in there. And so they put me on a slab in the larder of the officers' mess. I'd never been in the officers' mess before. And there I was on the larder, and I woke up and there was an arm hanging above me, and I pulled the arm. I said, "Oh," and the body went and fell on the floor. He's dead. And I said, "Hey, But wait, and the door opened and a white-faced sick birth attendant came out and said, oh, gosh, I said, here, this man's dead. He said, blimey, mate, I thought you friggin' well was. And so they picked me up and they took me back to Haslar Hospital. And when I was in Haslar Hospital, an angel of mercy flew down from the heavens. And she had a red cross on her breast, and she flew down, and she said, I went, and she said, and I went, and so she wrote it on a piece of paper, what is your name? And I said, Pertwee, and she went, oh no! Burst into tears. Was a girlfriend of mine. I'd been with her about 4 weeks before in London. We'd been out to dinner, and she was a VAD, and she just started, and the very first patient that she had to look after was me, a bloody conical mass, with a thing called a hematoma on my head, and you know all that. And so she said, may I look after Pertwee, doctor? And he said, yes, of course you can, and she looked after me. That's right, yes, she really looked after me. Which was wonderful, to be in a hospital and have somebody really look after you. And so I was sort of happy about that. And when I came out, I was ready for my CW candidates course. And I was then going to be an officer at sea, I thought. But unfortunately, I couldn't add. I can't work without a calculator or fingers and toes. And so when the officer at King Alfred said, right, you all understand the theorem of Pythagoras, I suppose? And I said, no, sir, I don't. He said, well, I haven't got time to teach you. He said, sit at the back, shut up, and be neat. Right, I said. So when we had the exam papers, I was terribly neat. I drew a picture of a lovely galleon, and I got 3 marks for neatness. But nothing for navigation. So I said, please, I said, don't send me back to sea, because I'll die. I can't be any longer at sea. I've done my sea time, surely. There must be something I can do as an officer. And so the captain, Captain Perry, said, yeah, I suppose, all right, so we'll put you in special branch. And he put me in special branch, which you had special jobs, rather strange jobs. A French officer suddenly appeared, and I heard him talking to my divisional officer, and he said, where is he? And he said, over there. And he came over and said, you Pertwee? And I said, yes. He said, alors, vous parlez français, naturellement. I said, eh? What? Never volunteer for anything, see. Nothing to do. French. Ooh. No. With D-Day. No. Keep well away from that. No. Do something in Scotland. No, France, no. And I said, no, je ne parle pas, just très mal. He said, but in your papers it says that you are a French family, that you naturally, you speak French. And he said, I said, no, I used to, but I don't anymore. So he said, that's very... He said, that's very, very strange. I will talk to you later. I thought, I'm in the dead trouble here. And he went up and he spoke to a fellow called Rankin. And he said, you are Rankin? And he said, yes, sir. He said, vous parlez français? He said, oui, je parle français. Oui, pas très bon, mais je parle. And I went, oh, my God. And he said, follow me, Rankin. And he went into the office. And he came out a few minutes later. And I rushed up to him and I said, Tony, right, come on, tell me, what was the job? He said, resident naval officer in Tahiti. Could you believe it? Years later, I was in Tahiti, and I stayed there for quite a time. And I got to know a fellow called Freddie Devonish, who was the British consul, and he'd been there in the Navy during the war. And I said to him one day, Freddie, did you by any chance know a fellow called Tony Rankin? And he turned round to one of the girls sitting alongside me. He said, you hear what old Pertwee wants to know? He wants to know if we know old Boom Boom Rankin. I said, thank you very much indeed, sir. Exactly what I want to hear. I think that the time has come for you to change your library books, to have a cup of coffee, and let me move around a little. I'm sedentary because I had a back operation a few months ago, and sitting in a bar stool for an hour or two does tend to paralyze me. So I'm going for a cross-country run for a few minutes. So if you'll bear with me, I'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you so much for your time. There's a familiar tune. Now, where were we? Yes, I was telling you, wasn't I, about when I was in the Navy. They decided they'd give me a commission and they sent me to the Isle of Man. And I went to HMS Valkyrie. And I hadn't been there very long when I was looking out of my cabin window one day, and I looked out in Douglas Harbour in the dead of night, and I saw, with horror, there was an enemy submarine actually in the harbour in Douglas. Sitting there, I could see it absolutely clearly, this silhouette of this big German submarine. And I'd only been there for a very short time. I rushed to the telephone and I phoned up the dockyard, and I said, get the 2 MTBs out, get them round quick. I said, because right in the bay, there is a German submarine. It's either broken down or something's happened, but it's there. And if you get a light on it, you'll get a shot at it, and we've got a German submarine. And so they said, right, come on, tally-ho. And round they came. And I was waiting, and they went whap with the searchlights. And there was an island with a castle on it that had been there for 2,000 years. Any of you know Douglas Harbour? Do you? Well, you see it there. There it is. So I was expelled. I didn't last long. So I went back into another job with Naval Intelligence Division on security staff, which was fun, because I spent a certain amount of time in the war meetings behind the head of Naval Intelligence, and Churchill sat at the end, and he used to smoke his stogies and his cigars, and put his cigars out in an ashtray, and when the meetings were over, everybody would leap up, and I'd leap up, and I'd say, right, sir, carry on, thanks, sir. Thank you, sir. There's, you take the papers, and so we'll clear up Mr. Churchill's thing. And I'd take the ashtray with all the cigar butts and like that into a little bag that I carried, and I used to sell the butts for $25. Believe me, a butt of a Churchill cigar was worth a lot of money in those days. We were up to all sorts of dodges. I enjoyed my time with NID, particularly because it was a very good tea boy. He made a marvellous cup of tea, and his name was Callaghan, actually, James Callaghan. Yeah, that's him, yes. And he was in the same division. Whenever I see Jim Callaghan now, I say, Jim, make us a cup of tea, there's a good lad. He's lovely. Jon Pertwee, the film director, and a lot of strange people, and we enjoyed the job. I must tell you a couple of things that we did. You never believe how stupid people can be. I and a friend of mine in the division hired a costume of German officers with the hats up and the Iron Cross and the boots. And we walked, the two of us, the whole way from Piccadilly Circus right up to the BBC. And the whole way up we walked, and people saluted us. Now, if we'd been lynched, it would have been our own fault entirely. You couldn't believe it. People are extraordinary. If you have a plum, you can get away with it. I saw a little man in a pub once. He looked exactly like Hitler. And I said, could I take a photograph of you? And he said, yeah. And I took this picture, and I had this photograph made up, and I stuck it in a passport. Underneath, I put Adolf Schicklgruber. And we had a German stamp on it that they did in the offices of NID. And I went to a secret station, which was HMS Vernon. And I went in a car, and the fellow stopped and said, right, can I have your papers, please, sir? And I said, yes, you can have my papers. He said, thank you very much, sir. He said, right, sir, thank you very much, sir. Adolf Schicklgruber, with my photographer. I joined then, after that, the Naval Broadcasting Section, and while I was there, a young sailor appeared. My commanding officer was, well, how can I put it? Yes. The young chap who was there looked very pretty in his uniform, and his name was David Jacobs. And he was about 17. He'd lied about his age to get in, and our commanding officer used to call him David, and he called me, he said, Pertwee. And I was the lieutenant commander, and I thought, I don't want to be called Pertwee when the sailor is called David. There's something going on here. Aye, I said. Very intelligent, very perspicacious of me. So when we were out one day in a tube train, and we were sitting opposite some people, David said, oh. And I said, what's the matter? He said, have a look. And I looked, there was a beautiful girl, lovely girl, beautiful figure, long blonde hair, and sitting on. I said, but that's no interest to you, is it? He said, what do you mean? And I said, well, it's not your style, is it, really? You know what I mean? He said, no, I don't know what you mean. And I said, well, you and the commanding officer, you know what I mean. He said, no, I don't know what you mean. He didn't. He didn't know what I meant at all. And so I said, well, I think I better tell you. So I told him. He said, oh, my God, no, that's not... Really? And I said, yes. He said, oh, my God. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I got you wrong, and I've been treating you very badly, and that's because I thought that you and he were a pair. You see, we're a sort of item. No, so I took him for tea at the Windmill Theatre, backstage, where all the girls rushed from dressing room to dressing room. They didn't bother with dressing gowns and things. They hadn't got the time. Blah, blah, blah. And David had a wonderful time. Oh, he had a wonderful time. He never looked back after that. And I became one of his greatest friends, and he still is one of my greatest friends. And his mother used to give us the most wonderful food. His father was a fruit merchant in Covent Garden, and so we had wonderful meat, because he used to, swap this for a bit of that and that, a bit of this, and we lived well. While we were there, we used to go around on trips and listen to people's conversations, and I was fascinated. We were going up from Parliament Square up to Trafalgar Square, and there's a theatre up at the end called the Whitehall Theatre, and had a play on it called Seagulls Over Sorrento. A very popular play, a service play. And there were two girls sitting in front of us, and one girl said, here, Phyllis, I'm going to the theatre Thursday. The other one said, oh yeah, what are you going to see? She said, I think it's called Sea Lions in Toronto. And the other one said, oh, that sounds nice. She said, is that the one with the Chinaman in it? The other one said, no, I don't think so. She said, pity, I like a Chinaman in a play. Now, would you believe dialogue like that? I mean, it is extraordinary. There's nothing funnier. As they say, there's not so queer as folk. And believe me, when you listen to what some people say, I'll give you some examples. One girl said to the other one, said, here, she said, budge up, Phyllis, I've only got one cheek on. She said, how's your dad? She said, oh, he's better, but he still has to stand sideways. I worked at the Café de Paris in London, and I came out of the kitchens. I wasn't going to come down the stairs after Marlene Dietrich and Noah Coward. I hadn't the gall to do that. I came through the kitchens, and the things I heard in the kitchens, I mean, there was one wonderful thing when a waiter came in, and he banged a tray down, and he said, oh, well, he's eaten it. Eaten what? It's incredible, isn't it? I remember listening to Cabaret, and there were two magicians, and one magician turned to the other and said, you know, boy, you've got no idea how difficult it is to get a budgerigar out of a treacle tart. Now, these are all true, I swear. My director, James Hill, who directed Wurzel Gummidge, he heard a lovely conversation where a girl said, so I stood there till my vest was wringing wet. And the other one said, yes, well, you would, wouldn't you? She said, could it have been a horse? She said, no. No, it was nibbled. And I know nibbling when I see it. She said, could it have been a rabbit? She said, no. Rabbits can't reach hanging baskets. Now, what the hell was that all about? Oh, I love it. I love those sort of conversations. Anyway, David and I had great fun in this division. And while I was there, I had to check up on various people doing and saying naughty things on radio. There was a show called Mediterranean Merry-Go-Round then with Eric Barker, and he was being rather rude about my lords of the Admiralty, and so I was sent along to check up on him. And when I was there, he said, I want somebody to shout out something from the audience. And I said, I'll do it. He said, what's your name? I said, Pertwee. And he said, are you a member of the Pertwee family? I said, yes. He said, oh, good, yeah, you can do it. And I had to shout out a line. He and his wife, Pearl Hackney, were arguing. And I had to say, oi, leave him alone. You're always picking on the poor perisher. And she's supposed to turn round and she'd say, who on earth is that? And Eric's supposed to look into the audience and say, oh, that's the Minister of Education. Now, that's precisely the kind of joke I was sent down there to stop him doing. But I got an enormous laugh with it, and I was so proud. It was the first laugh I'd ever had. I'd been a straight actor before. I'd never done something from the audience, and I was thrilled. And so after the show, Eric said, very good, I enjoyed that, you did that well. He said, what were you here for? I said, well, I was a spy. I'm coming here to spy on you and report on you. He said, well, what sort of spy are you going to be? I said, terrible. And he said, do you want to come back next week? I said, yes. So I came back the next week, and I brought a character with me, because I'd heard on the news, and that's Alvar Liddell at the end of the news. Good night. Here is the news in Norwegian, and a voice said, Jeden, Joden, Jeden, nigger, nigger, up to bombe. I said, what did they say? And the next day I listened again, he said, Jeden, Joden, Jeden, nigger, nigger, up to bombe. So I went to a Norwegian that I knew at the Admiralty, and I said, what does the jeden, joden, jeden, nigger de bombit mean? He said, nothing. I said, well, that's what they say every night. He said, well, de bombit probably means something to do with bombing. I said, well, it's very strange. So I went to Eric and I said, I've got a character for you. He said, what is it? I said, he's a Norwegian seaman. His name's Svensson. And Eric said, yes, what does he say? I said, he says, jeden, joden, jeden, nigger de bombit. So Eric said, is that funny? I said, it will be. And so when we came in on that week, he said, Svensson. And I said, jeden. He said, how are you? I said, joden. He said, what have you been doing? I said, nigger de bombit. Within a fortnight, practically the entire United Kingdom was saying, jeden, joden, jeden, nigger de bombit. And to this day, people sometimes come up to me and say, jeden, joden, jeden, nigger de bombit. So I was with him then for 5 years, which is good. I came out of the Navy and I stayed on with Eric in Waterlogged Spa for years and years and years. And I joined Jewel and Wallace in Up the Pole with Claude Dampier and had a big, big run with that. And I was doing plays at the same time. I did a play with Ralph Richardson called The Amazing Dr. Clitterhouse. In this, he was trying to find out what made criminals tick, why they did the things they did, and he was trying to study them. And we were sitting round in a room and we were playing cards, and I was playing a little Cockney pickpocket. And I said, right, it's 2 no trumps, your turn, Doc. And he's supposed to say, but I've already had my cards. And I sit in the queue and I said, right, 2 no trumps, your turn, Doc. Your turn, Doc. And Ralph Richardson went. So we knew he'd gone. And I said, no, that's right. I'm 2 no trumps and it's your turn, Doc. And he said, yeah. And from the wings now came the prompts. I've already had my cards. Huh? I have already... And then from up here from the flies, from the flymen, I've already had my cards. And down here in the orchestra pit, I've already had my cards. And eventually Ralph Richardson threw his cards down on the table, turned to the wings and said, I know, you bloody fool, but who says it? I was in a play with the lovely Dame Edith Evans. And there was a wonderful story about Dame Edith. She got into a taxi and she said, drive me to the theatre. And the cab driver said, I'm not driving you nowhere, madam, not with that pooch. She said, you will drive me to the theatre at once. He said, no, madam, I told you I'm not taking that dog in my cab. And she said, then you will drive me to the police station, which is the law. I don't know whether you knew that. And so he said, oh, we're all right then. But keep an eye on it. And they drove to the Haymarket Theatre. And she got out, and he'd been grumbling all through the journey. And when she got out, she gave him the exact fare with no tip, and she got out and she walked away. And he turned round to check that nothing was left behind, and there was a puddle in the back of the cab. And he said, oh, I knew it. He said, here, madam, your dog has just peed in my cab. And she said, wrong, I peed in your cab. Lovely. I did a lot of films in those days, a lot of movies. We had made about 5 or 6 films a year. And I was under contract with ABPC with George Cole. And George and I made pictures together. We made a film you may have seen called Will Any Gentleman. It was shown on television just a short time ago. And during the break, I said to George, come on, let's go backstage and see the girls. Neither of us were married. We'll go and check the girls out. And we went into the theatre scene, and there were all these modern ballet dancers, the best there were in England. And there was one girl sitting there, and she was ravishing. She was absolutely beautiful. And I said, hi, hello, how are you? Good morning, all right? And she went... And I thought, that didn't go down very well. But all the rest of them were saying, morning, Mr. Pertwee, good morning, Mr. Cole, hello, hello, hello. And I really was determined to crack this and find out why this girl was being so cold and miserable to me. And so every day I'd come in and say, hello, how are you? Nice to see you. Okay? So I really felt very bad about this indeed, and I couldn't understand it. And George said, what have you done? Have you insulted the girl? I said, I don't know, I don't understand it at all. And I was going home that night, and I was going out of the studio and going through the main gates, and she was walking. There she had sunglasses on, and she was walking along. And I said, hello, hello, and she turned to me and she said, hello, how are you, Mr. Pertwee? And I thought, that's funny. So I said, are you going to London? She said, yes. I said, would you like a lift? She said, yes, I'd love one, thank you so much. And she got in the car and she said, oh, this is lovely, thank you so much. And I said, tell me something, why have you been so bloody unfriendly to me for the last fortnight? And she said, have we met? I said, what do you mean, have we met? I've said good morning to you every day, I've offered you cups of coffee. And she said, good God, was that you? And I said, well, of course it was me. She said, I can't see a thing without my glasses. And so I married her. You're dying to know what her name is. Her name is Jean Marsh. Remember Jean? In upstairs, downstairs? Yeah, we're still great friends. She's a terrible wife, but she's a marvellous friend. No, she had a great career ahead of her, and she wanted to pursue her career, and I didn't want that. I wanted a wife, and I wanted some kids. So I married again later. I married a lovely girl called Ingeborg, a German girl, and I got 2 kids, Sean and Daryl. Sean now doing terribly well in the film business, and Daryl has just joined the National Theatre Company, and so I'm very proud of them. I had a lot to do with sport, too, in those days. I was a very keen skier, water skier. Wonderful story. I was skiing in the south of France, and a friend of mine had a boat with a Zeppelin engine in it. And he said, well, I'll take you on the Grand Parade. You carry the banner for England. And so I was going to be like Sister Anna carrying the banner, you know, the big flag. And there was the French flag and the Italian flag and the American flag, and we all went off in a line. We went out to the jetty at Juan-les-Pins, and we all turned round and went out to sea, going up towards the jetty with all the celebrities and all the important people, the VIPs sitting, and below it there was a pontoon where you went skiing from, about that high. So I put 3 ropes on the end of my towing rope because the boat was so fast that I needed more room to maneuver. And he forgot. And so we headed straight for the pontoon with all the people sitting on it, and I realized he wasn't turning quick enough. And I went on and on and on, and they all went, this I was going straight on, and I knew there was going to be a disaster. And so my ski, I was on a slalom ski with a big fin, and the ski and the fin hit the pontoon like that, and it catapulted me in a neat parabolic arc, straight over the heads. Everybody went, whoa. And I landed with a splash right behind them, a sort of 25 or 30 foot leap, straight out, and landed in the water, and I was screaming mad, and said, you stupid bloody... He'd come round the back. I said, he said, quiet. I said, why? He said, listen. And everyone was saying, fantastic! Vive Angleterre! Quel saut extraordinaire! Bravo! You see, they thought that I'd done it on purpose. The next year, I got a letter from the mayor of Juan-les-Pins saying, cher Monsieur Pertwee, would you come this year and do your celebrated jump? No, I said, I won't. My other sport is diving, and I do a lot of diving, sub-aqua. And I went out eventually to the best place for sub-aqua in the world, to the Seychelles. And I was diving the Seychelles with a group of people, and there was an Irishman. And he said, you know, lads, I've never been under the water. I'm not much of a swimmer, he said, but do you think you could teach us how to do it? And we said, yeah, no problem at all. And we taught him how to, you know, fix his mask on and how to use his return valve and mouthpiece and everything. All right, he said, I think I got the idea. So we went down the anchor chain, which was down about, I suppose, 60 or 70 feet. And there was a German cook who went down first, I'm a very good diver, and he went down and he looked around and he looked up at me and he went, that means over there is a biter. A shark. So just don't go too near that thing. So not that they worried you, because they don't. They've got so many fish to eat there, they don't bother you. And so I went right, and so the next diver came down, I went, and he went, and then he went over there, another one over there. And then came the Irishman. And we went like this. And he went, ah! And he opened his mouth, and his breathing tube came out of his mouth, and he fainted under the water. Now, in a situation like that, it's no good splashing water in his face. It's very hard to get a fainted man together again, you know, and put his breathing apparatus back. And it was very difficult indeed. But we did. We managed to get him out and said, calm down. And we said, go over there. About 400 feet away, we said, stay there. Now, the last diver to come down was the leader of the expedition, a fellow from Hapag-Lloyd Travel Company, and we went... And he went round the back, because he knew that sharks don't back into holes, they come in frontwards. And so he must have come in from the back. So he went round the back with his spear gun, and he rammed his spear gun up the shark's jacksie. Well, what did the shark do? The shark went like this, and who did he make for? The Irishman. Who went, oh! And they fainted under the water again. We rushed to him, took him up, and he said, I've never gone in the bloody water. Yeah, I'm not only not going in it, I'm not going to drink the bloody stuff. Lovely sport. I don't snow ski very much now because I'm hideously embarrassed. Because I fall over, having done some superb skiing. People say, good God, look at that old fart going down the hill like that. And I do a wonderful, wonderful turn, and I go right into the snow, and I can't get up. And I lie there, like a turtle with my legs in the air saying, please, somebody help me. And it became so embarrassing, I've given that one up. But I still sub-aqua. I've flown small light aircraft. I've flown these ridiculous hang gliders with motor mower engines, which horrified my wife to death, and she said, come down. She kept saying, I ride motorbikes, and I would still race motor cars if they had an old gentleman racing them. So I love it, I'm afraid, much to the chagrin and horror of my wife. I did the music hall. I went into the music hall and was working at the Moss Empire Circuits. Music hall was an appalling experience, ladies and gentlemen, in certain theatres. Glasgow Empire, dear God. I was there with Monty Ray, an Apache singer, Max Wall, Jimmy James, and myself. And Jimmy James said, I'd bloody tell you, he said, I'd bloody die here. He said, there's only one bloody thing goes here. He said, that's Negroes and piano accordions. He said, I told them not to book me. And he was the greatest comic. Do you ever see Jimmy James? Wonderful, wonderful comedian. He went on, he died, not a titter, nothing. And he kept on, I told you. And this little Scotch guy, the singer, said, no, you got the wrong idea. You got the wrong idea, Jimmy. Don't be frightened of him. Get out there and bash him. He said, you want to watch me when I get out there? You see, I'll show you how to handle him. Don't be frightened of him. Get out there and whack him. He said, you see. And he said, and he went off in his dressing room. I then went on, and I died. 20 minutes, I never got a titter. Not a laugh of any sort at all. And when I'd finished, they went. So I went off and I said to the manager, please pay me off. Please pay me off. He said, you're a great success. I said, I was? How did you work that out? He said, you didn't get the did you? I said, no, I didn't. He said, well then, you're a great success. Sassanas, get the as a rule. But you didn't, well. And Monty Ray said, John, don't worry. You got the wrong idea. He said, listen, get out there and next time the next house, get out, whack them and bash it. Watch me, I can do it. Max Wall, one of the great comedians of all time, he went on and he said, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I cannot tell you how very glad I am to be back here once again in Glasgow. And a voice as clear as a bell from the back of the gallery said, get back to your own friggin' country. And Max was horrified at this word. And he, for the first time in his life, he was spellbound. He couldn't say a word. And he said, the terrible mistake. He said, I beg your pardon. What did you say? And a man from the front row of the stalls got up and said, my friend said, get back to your own friggin' country. Well, that did it. Max went into the wings and he said, what do I do now? And the stage manager said, if you value your life, get into your dance. And Max went and went off. And he said, I've never been so embarrassed in all my life. And the little Scotsman said, no, Max. You've got the wrong idea. He said, listen, I'm on now, watch me. So all of us gathered round to watch him. And he went on and he sang, and the whole house, the roof came in. Hooray! Bravo! And he turned and said, see. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, he said, great. He said, it's great to be back here once again in Glasgow, because you all know I'm a Glaswegian, born and bred. And there's one man, the audience got up and said, you're a friggin' liar. And they threw the theatre at him. They tore the seats up. They tore the ashtrays out. The gallery had chicken netting all over to stop them throwing things. And they tore a hole in the chicken netting and threw things at him. They had to get a police car to take him out, covered with a rug. That's because he'd said, The unfortunate thing is saying, I'm a Glaswegian born and bred, and he wasn't, and they knew it. You're a liar. So Glasgow Empire was not the happiest place to be. But I worked in variety for many, many years, and I enjoyed it. Mrs. Mack at Manchester. There was a young lady who was in the company that I was rather enamoured of, and we were both staying at Mrs. Mack's. And I was this side of the house. She had two houses, with a stairway going up here and another house stairway going up there. And this lady friend of mine was staying in the other part of the house, and I was staying in this part. And so I said, you pop up, and I'll pop up and say goodnight. And so about 12:30, 1 o'clock, I crept round, and I crept up the stairs, and sitting at the top of the stairs in a chair. Oh, no, you don't, Mr. Pertwee. No, we have nothing like that in this house. Thank you very much. Get back to your own bed, she said. I knew. I could see the light in your eyes. Mrs. Mack used to come and watch the television like that. And she'd look at the television, said, I've had him. Oh, I've had her. And we didn't understand what she meant to begin with. All right, we've had them. Yes, she said, oh, yes. She said, I could tell you some stories about them. Oh, she said she could. And she did. She told me about, I haven't the gall to tell you. Wonderful. Mrs. Mack. Great lady. I then decided that I'd do something else on radio. And it was a services show. We called it the Navy Lark. And it didn't take us long to get it set up. The BBC takes a long time to do anything now, but it didn't then. It was very, very quick. And I got a producer called Alistair Scott Johnson, a very good writer called Laurie Wyman and George Evans. We were, up until last year, the longest-running radio show in the history of broadcasting. I believe the HUD lines has now beaten us. We ran nearly 20 years. And it was a joyful occasion, because we all used to meet on a Sunday, 25 weeks of the year, and with Ronnie Barker, Teniel Evans, Michael Bates. It was a great company of people. Ronnie Barker used to come with stories, the funniest stories you've ever heard, because he got them straight from the stock exchange, where all the best stories come from. He was with us for years and years and years, but eventually had to leave because he became so popular in his own right. He hadn't the time to devote to being in the Navy Lark, so he sadly left. Alistair Scott Johnson said, well, who are we going to get to do all the voices that Ronnie does? And I said, get somebody else and I'll bloody well kill you. He said, do you want to do them? I said, yes, I do. I was sick to death of the chief by this time. Right, left end, down a beep, please, sir. And I got bored with that, and so I did a myriad other characters. I did about 40 characters for them. There was a character that I did in the Navy Lark called Admiral Birkinshaw. But we called him Admiral Firkinshaw. Because we said there are Birkinshaws, but there's no Firkinshaw. So we'll be all right. So there was Admiral Firkinshaw, and he was a terrible character. We got a telegram within 3 hours of transmission saying, I'm seeing my solicitor on Thursday at 10 o'clock to sue the BBC for the defamation of character, yours sincerely, Admiral Charles Firkinshaw. And it was true. The character, that character that I've been doing for years in different forms was the lady who ran the tuck shop in the school I was at Sherburn. And for years, boys said, one long bun, one short bun, please, Mrs. Thompson. And she used to say, thank you very much, Mr. Next. She never knew one boy's name in 56 years, but she had a go. Thank you very much, Mr. Next. Wonderful. And one day when I was doing the Navy Lark, 10/11, Tuffy Goldstein speaking, starboard look out here, sir. Taffy Goldstein said, why did you put yourself up for Doctor Who? I hear Pat Troughton's leaving. And I said, well, I don't know, why would they want me? He said, well, you'd be a very good doctor. So I rang my agent and I said, Richard, yeah. I said, I've got a very good idea. How about putting me up to play Doctor Who? Richard? Richard? He said, yes? Oh, good. I thought you got... No, I quite understand. It's not a very good idea. He said, no, I think it's a terrible idea. But I'll give it a whirl. And so he rang up to the producer and he said, hello, this is Richard Stone. I'd like to suggest one of my clients to take over from Patrick Troughton as Doctor Who. And they said, who? And he said, Jon Pertwee. Hello? Hello? He said, I had exactly the same reaction, don't worry. And they said, no, we're gobsmacked. Our mouths are hanging open. We can't believe this. He said, why? He said, may we read you our short list that we've compiled 18 months ago? He said, yes. And they read it, and my name was second on it. It was the most extraordinary thing, and we never knew. I promise you, nobody knew. Daniel Evans didn't know when he suggested it. Nobody knew, but I know for a fact it was true because I knew a young girl who was a PA on the show, an assistant, and she said, no, you've been up for this for about 18 months. They've been talking about it. Now you're all dying to know who the first one was. Well, it was Ron Moody. Ron Moody. He was going to do it, but he couldn't do it, and so I was lucky I got it. Now, there's a story interesting about this. I did a play in London called There's a Girl in My Soup, which was a tremendous hit in England and on Broadway. And so I went to America to play this with Gig Young. Gig Young, myself, and Barbara Ferris. And we did the tour of America, but they never give you a contract for the Broadway production because they're very fly like that. They don't want to give it away. They said, we'll do you the tour, and then you have another contract for Broadway if it comes. Well, we were a smash hit on the road, so I was just about to sign my contract for Broadway, when an irate producer came from England, and he said, what the hell's name are you doing here? You're supposed to be in England. You're supposed to be doing a pilot for this show. I said, what pilot? He said, we gave you the script based on a character that you played in a thing called Beggar My Neighbour, where you and Reg Varney and Peter Jones and June Whitfield and Patty Coombs, you did this show, and it was very successful, and you played a bank manager, and we've written this whole series round this. And you're supposed to be doing it. And I said, well, you never gave me the script. You never said anything positive. You didn't give me a contract. They said, well, anyway, we are offering it to you now. You're going to come back and do the pilot. And I said, well, it's either coming back to do the pilot or something that may be a complete flop. And I'm giving up a smash hit success on Broadway. You must be joking. No, there's no way. I'm not coming back. And so they said, oh, all right, we'll have to give it to somebody else. And they did. They gave it to Arthur Lowe, and it's called Dad's Army. Could you believe it? I turned down Dad's Army. But still, after all, people turn down the Beatles, and they can't be right all the time. I came back, of course, and I saw Arthur Lowe. Nobody in the world could be funnier than Arthur Lowe. I mean, he corpses me. It's superb. I watch it over and over and over again. My cousin, Bill, of course, is in it, and he tells me all sorts of wonderful stories about Arthur. I could never have played it like that, but much I probably wouldn't have had to. They would let me play it in my own way. Sean Sutton, who was the head of programs, said, you want to play Doctor Who? I said, let's have lunch. He said, yeah, okay. At the end of lunch, he said, you want to play it? And I said, let me think about it. He said, okay. So I thought about it, and he rang me up and said, do you want to play Doctor Who? And I said, can we have another lunch? And he said, yeah. So we had another lunch, and he said, do you want to play Doctor Who? And I said, let me think about it. And I rang him up a week later, and I said, do you do dinners? And he said, yeah, go on, we'll have a dinner. So we had a dinner, and he said, do you want to do a Doctor Who? And I said, yes. But how do I play it? And he said, as Jon Pertwee. And I said, who the hell's that? I've never been Jon Pertwee. Never. I've no idea who Jon Pertwee is. I've hidden under a green umbrella all my career like Peter Sellers. I've never been me. And not, up till that time I hadn't been. So he said, oh, don't worry, we'll find you. And so I got the job, and I did the very first one, and my God, was I embarrassed. When I look now at those scenes when I'm standing in front of a mirror trying on funny hats, and that awful, embarrassing scene in the shower with a shower hat, oh, terrible. But luckily my producers left, and Barry Letts, the actor, he came in and took over, and he really knew about actors, and he understood what I was trying to do, and I wanted to play a character for the first time in my life, straight down the middle, to play it for real, make it believable, even though I was all flamboyant and this folk hero figure, you know, with a frilly shirt. And that was an accident, because they wanted me to do something for the front page of the Radio Times, and I went to my wardrobe and I found a velvet smoking jacket, which was rather trendy at the time, and a Mr. Fish frilly shirt, and I found a pair of black trousers and some elastic-sided boots that I'd worn in pantomime, and a cape that my grandfather used to wear, an Inverness cape. And so I put this on. Ah! You may remember that photograph. Wah! And they looked at it, they said, that's damn good. I said, well, yeah, but how the hell do we explain it away in the first program? He said, oh, we'll find a way. And we did. You remember, I came out of the hospital bed, and I went into the changing room where all the doctors were, and I nicked various articles of clothing, a cape from an eccentric old man, and a hat, which we abandoned, and Tom Baker picked up with afterwards, thank God. And everything else was pinched from this locker room. And then I went out and I pinched the old man's car, and that was the beginning of Bessie, you know, driving the old Edwardian roadster. So when I said to the brigadier, can I keep these clothes in the car? He said, no, you can't. You've got to give them back, but we'll get you some others like it. And so for all the years I was in Doctor Who, I wore these flamboyant, lovely clothes. The cape sort of represented the wings of the mother hen, with the chicks underneath. And it was rather symbolic, I thought. So I had 5 glorious years playing Doctor Who. Barry Letts, I say, was a wonderful producer. He gave me full rein to allow me to do what I wanted to do, because it was gadgetry. I had, if I rang up Barry and said, I've just seen a motorcycle that folds up into a briefcase, he said, good, get it, we'll put it in the programme. And we did. I mean, all those gadgets. Remember the Whomobile, that amazing car? Well, I designed that with a fellow called Peter Farris from Nottingham, this extraordinary motor car. And wherever I drove it, the police would say, get in there. And I'd press the button, the lid would go up, and he'd come up and say, oh, blimey, it's you. And I said, I know what you're doing. You want to see this, don't you? I said, well, it's not too wide. The lights aren't too high. And it isn't a hovercraft, and we had to go through all this hassle. Until eventually I got a low loader. We put it on a low loader because cars were looking, saying, God, blimey, and they'd run into each other. And it caused chaos on the roads. And so we were careful with it. Still going, still looking after it. The young man looks after it. I let him have it because he lost his mother under very tragic circumstances. And so the father said, can we have the car for him, and I'll look after it. Whenever you want it, you can have it back. Barry Letts sent for me when he hadn't been very long, and he said, look, I've got to have a chat to you. He said, I don't think you're taking this thing very seriously. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you're always laughing about. I mean, you're always laughing. You're all in hysteria. You and Katie Manning are in hysteria all the time. John Levine, can't get a word out of him. He's always laughing. What's going on? He said, we've got a job to do. And I said, Barry, have we ever been late? He said, no. I said, have we ever dried up badly or held you up? He said, no. And I said, have we sort of held up production in any way? He said, no. And I said, then what the hell are you worrying about? I said, what I'm doing is I'm making people have fun. And if people have fun, you get work done. Look at you doing a factory floor or something and everybody's enjoying themselves. You get much more work done. In anything, teamwork, teams, tug-of-war teams. If you all hated each other, you'd never do anything. But the fact that you're all together pulling, that's what makes it good. And that's what made it good with us. Nick Courtney, in Inferno, wore a black patch and a scar. And he had his back turned to us. And I said, I don't know what we'll do. And Caroline, John, and myself, and John Levine, I said, we'll all put scars on our faces, and we'll all have black patches. And when he's got his back to us, and we'll go in, and we'll say, he's going to turn around and he said, now look here, doctor, I've told you before. I said, you'll take one look at us and you'll corpse him. See, so we did this, and we all put the black patches on, and we would, I said, come on, put yourself together, John, because John Levine was in hysterics before he started. And they came through the door, and I went, which was the cue for Nick to turn round. And Nick turned round, he looked at me and he said, now look here, doctor, I've told you before, and I won't tell you again. He paid no attention whatsoever. So all of us fell on the floor laughing, and the director got furious and chucked us all out and said, stop buggering about, for Christ's sake. Let's get on with it and do it properly. You can't throw Nick. A wonderful guy, superb. I work with him all the time. Whenever I do any shows I can, I use Nick. And so the whole team was great. Roger and John and Richard Franklin, Katie, Liz Sladen, all of us get on tremendously well. All the doctors, well, not all, most of the doctors. Patrick Troughton, he and I were in the Navy together. He was very eccentric. He was in MTBs. And when he used to go out in action and it was cold, he wore a tea cozy on his head. I've got a wonderful photograph of Pat going out to sea on the bridge with a tea cozy on his head. He said, it's so bloody cold. He said, I can't know. A tin hat, ridiculous thing. He said, tea cozy. When we were working together, we were doing a thing called the Three Doctors with Bill Hartnell. And poor Bill was very sick. He couldn't appear really with us. We shot him all on a screen, on a visual screen. Pat and I worked together, and Pat was under the TARDIS console, and he's supposed to say something like, I put the chine screw in the Rotset, see? And I'm supposed to say, but that's not where it should be. And he said, oh God, I've dropped it. And I said, stop, cut, hold on. Sorry, what was that, Pat? He said, what? And I said, what was that you said? He said, well, malign. I said, it wasn't. You said, oh God, I've dropped it. You're supposed to say something completely different. He said, oh, Christ, that's near enough. And I said, no, it is not. I said, I'm the doctor now, not you. I said, you say the cue and be done with it, because I can't, I need cues. Oh, God, blimey, he said. Wonderful man. One day he said to me, I said, I'm going up to do a show up in the north, Pebble Mill at 1. Do you want to come with me, because they're going to talk about Doctor Who? He said, no. I hate those sort of things. I said, come on with me, because we'll go out and have a nice lunch. And he said, oh, all right, go on then. I said, the tickets are all paid. So he came up, and he came up with me, and we did the interview. And halfway through, we got a message, and the message said, would you care to come and have lunch at this factory that makes suitcases? And I said, yes, fine. So Pat said, no, I don't. I said, yes, you are. You come with me. So after the show was over, the car came to fetch us, a limo, took us to the factory. The director met us. We went into the director's lounge, and we went to the director's dining room. We had a superb lunch with an excellent bottle of wine, and another bottle, and another bottle. A very good lunch. And then he said, would you care to come around the factory quickly, say hello to the people? And Pat was this time extremely jolly. Almost had the Ticos on his head. And he said, yes. He said, come on. We went around the factory, and we had a lovely time. We talked to everybody. And when we got back, the director said, would you just come into this room a minute? We've got something for you. And we went into the room, and there we had a whole set of suitcases with our initials on them. Beautiful, all packed inside each other. And Pat said, oh, thank you very much indeed. On the train going back, Pat said, do you often do shows like this? And I said, yeah. He said, do you get invited to lunch often? I said, yeah. He said, with bottles of wine like that? I said, yes, often. He said, do you often get the presents like this? And I said, yes. And he said, can I come again? So I took him to Chicago, and we had the famous water pistol fight, which you've heard about. And we fought each other with water pistols, until eventually somebody gave me a water pistol that had a 5-gallon water tank on my back. And I got him from 140 feet. At least I would have done if he hadn't put up a golf umbrella. I love Pat. Very sad that he died. And it was a great, great team, and I enjoyed it. And I had 5 blissful years doing that, doing all my own stunts, because Terry Walsh allowed me to do them. Or he did all the falls and I did the stunts. And he said, right. And when I left, he gave me a lovely sword, and he said, to Jon Pertwee, the best acting double in the business. Lovely compliment. Lovely chaps. I mean, I remember once when Billy Horrigan, one of the stuntmen, I'd had a bit of an argument with him. And he came towards me, and I went, hey, to throw him over my head. And he came, and I went, and got a hernia. And I said, Billy, what the hell happened? Why did you do this? He said, there was that little matter we were talking about, just now, about that, where we had a little disagreement about, you know what I mean? And I said, I'm terribly sorry, you were absolutely right. He said, oh, no, I told you I was right. And I said, yeah, you are. I do apologise, Billy. He said, that's quite all right, John. And he said, right, stand by, everybody. Billy came toward me. Right, cha! And he went about 40 feet in the air, which just shows you, see, you get a good man, a good stunt man behind you, you can do it. But I don't think that I could do him if you knew seeing Aikido anymore. I did Doctor Who on radio, the first Paradise of Death. Tremendously successful. So successful, the BBC said, marvellous, we'll do a repeat. And they waited for 9 months before they did the repeat. Really speedy stuff, And they put the repeat on, and they put on episode 1, 2, 3, 4. They said, next week, the denouement, the last week of Paradise of Death, and they put on episode 4 again. And thousands of people rang up and said, what the hell's going on? We heard this last week. And they said, oh, my God, I'm sorry. Well, we can't do it next week because the Queen's making a speech. We'll have to do it week after. And they did. But this time the rhythm had gone from it. But nevertheless, they got together and they thought, that's funny. This really must be a very popular program, because if thousands of people ring up, as they have, and complain bitterly of us putting the program on twice, how many people must be listening to it? So that gave them an idea. So they said, well, do another one. And we did another one, and Barry Letts wrote it. It's called The Ghosts of N Space, and we recorded it 9 months ago. And about 4 months ago, they said, oh, yes, wonderful news. We're going to play The Ghosts of N Space. And we said, good. When? And they said, next year. Real speedy stuff. It may be something to do with the fact that Spielberg, is supposed to have bought the rights, and maybe doing it, maybe he wants to have control of everything. I don't know whether that's it or not. Interesting. I got a call from a lady from the Evening Standard not long ago, and she said, congratulations. I said, what on? And she said that you're playing Doctor Who for Spielberg. And I said, I am? Marvellous. And she said, what did you know about it? I said, never heard of it. You're the first to tell me. What wonderful news. Thank you so much. And she said, you're putting me on. I said, no, I'm not. I said, in any case, the whole thing's stupid. Eric Idle's playing it. I said, I've read it in the papers and all the national press yesterday. And she said, no, he's not. I just called him up on the phone. He said he's never heard of it. He's not doing it either. They put it in. Dudley Moore was doing it. I had told a lovely story that somebody said to the head of Amblin, and they said, you do realize that the Doctor Who, if we do it in America, has got to have an English feel to it. It's English, 100% English. It's got to have an English feel. We got to have, therefore, an English actor, a mid-Atlantic actor to play it. And the head of the program said, yeah. How about David Hasselhoff? Dear God. All that lumbering muscle running along a beach. I mean, can you imagine? Doctor Who, no. So, I don't know. I don't think it'll ever happen, if you want my honest opinion. I think they'll go on talking about it forever and they'll never get round to it. And if they do, Dudley Moore will probably play. 5 years with that. Then after that I did a show called Who Done It? A crime quiz, the first cerebral crime quiz going with Pat Mower. Pat got it right every single week. For 4 years, got it right every single week. Until one day I said, Pat, do you want to be on the show next week? He said, yeah. I said, do you want to be in it next year? He said, yeah. I said, then get it wrong. I said, you can't go on getting it right, but he did, and he didn't cheat. He used to watch, and he used to go up into his dressing room with pieces of paper, sheaves of paper, and he'd go on and on and on and said, that's it, I've got it. The last season, he wasn't in it because he did get it right all the time, and it got rather boring. Anushka Hempel never got anything right. Never. She didn't even understand the game. We played it 4 years, but she never understood it. But she was bliss. She was absolute bliss. She looked gorgeous, so who cared? And she was wildly popular. Of course, people said, bloody hell, she's thick, isn't she? I knew that. I could tell who the bloody murderer was straight away. Thick. Him old smart ass there, don't I? Anyway, I did that for 4 years. And then when that was over, I was asked to do a film. I was asked to do a big picture by Keith Waterhouse and Willis Hall. They said, would you like to make a movie of Wurzel Gummidge? And of course I'd read it as a book, as a child, the Barbara Eufen Todd's books in the 30s. And it had been played on radio with Norman Shelley and been enormously successful. And I loved the books. And I said, oh, yes, I'd love to. They remembered the character, the postman. They remembered this West Country character that I played. So they said, would you like to play it? Now, unfortunately, we couldn't get it off the ground. It was very sad. No money, we couldn't get the distribution. And so they abandoned it. And I said, please don't do that. Write me a pilot. They wrote me a very short pilot. And I took it to Sean Sutton and said, Sean, you're a lucky chap. I said, I did 5 years with you, Doctor Who, and I shot the figures up. And I'll do the same for you with this. Read that, Wurzel Gummidge, wonderful. And he read it and said, it'll never go. Never go. I said, why? He said, no, far too fantastic. That'll never go. So I said, I think you're foolish. And I took it to Thames Television, where I'd done Who Done It? And I gave it to Philip Jones. And I said, they are, Philip, aren't you lucky? Sean Sutton turned it down. He said, oh, good, let me read it. And he read it and he read, no. No, it'll never go. I began to lose confidence in this show. So I gave it eventually to Lewis Rudd, who was a very perspicacious man from Southern Television. And he said, oh, I think this is wonderful, it's magic. And we did it, and it took us 18 months to get it on the air. It was certainly the greatest fun thing that I've ever been involved with. I loved it. Because you ran the gamut of emotions from A to Z in 25 minutes. And if you got stuck, you changed your head. Which was an idea I had, because with the TARDIS, you see, you can go forward and back in time. And I thought, well, that's what we can do with Wurzel. He takes his head off and puts another head on. So he can be anything. You can be a singing head, or a writing head, or a thinking head, or any guy, a daft head. And so it worked. And within weeks, well, you all know what happened to it. It became one of the top-rated shows in the country. We had 12.5 million viewers a week, and we were on at 5:30 in the afternoon. We knocked Doctor Who into a cocked hat, which was funny, because I'm knocking myself into a cocked hat, because my repeats were showing at the time. But we had enormous success with it, I'm happy to say.
Yeah, because I'll tell you for why, because when I were doing Doctor Who, say, I were number 3. And when I was doing Wurzel Gummidge, I was number 1. There weren't nobody, apart from radio, but nobody on telly well he did it. So I done it there for Telly Willie, and I had somebody nice to do it with old Eunice Stubbs. She's proper, she is. She's lovely. She's a right bitch in the show, but she's lovely. And Jeffrey Bell done with him what plays the Crow Man. He were lovely too. And one day we were doing a scene together, Jeffrey and I just said, Mr. Crowman, sir, I've done the most terrible thing. I said, I've torn one of my Aunt Sally's legs off, and there's only one thing for it, and that's to put me on the compost heap. He said, Wurzel, I think you're right. I can't think. And the tears were coming down, and I stopped in the shop and said, what the bloody hell are you crying for? I said, I'm supposed to be doing the crying here, not you. He said, I can't help it, it's so beautiful. So we had a lot of people in tears with that. It was lovely. A gorgeous show to do. I remember Beryl Reid playing my mother, who was supposed to chase me with a pitchfork. And she was chasing me along with this pitchfork, and she was going about that much every 5 minutes. And I said, oh, Beryl, for God's sake, come on, give us a chase or a prod or something. I'm going to run away from something. And she didn't. And the director said, come on, Beryl, move your stumps. I mean, chase him. He's got to be frightened of you. And she said, darling, I was booked for the acting, not the bloody running. Gorgeous show to do. I'm now doing an animated version of it, of Wurzel, in plasticine. And we're looking for the finance to make it now. We've got the company to make it, and we've made the pilot. But it's very expensive making animated cartoons. But very lucrative, because the merchandising is very good on anything to do with animation. Yes, very important. The carry-on films. Peter Rogers, the director and the producer, they both said to me, do you want to be in the carry-ons? I said, no. I said, because I'm very busy in the film business. I'm making a lot of films, British quota pictures, granted, not international movies. And I said, because all your marvellous actors you've got, like Kenneth Connor, Kenneth Williams, Sid James, are terrific actors. I mean, really great actors. And what are they doing now? Nothing but carry-ons. Their career is finished. They just do carry-ons. That's all they can do. And this is what Kenneth Williams' whole career was ruined by that. Oh, and he did a lot of other things as well, but as an actor, it was. So I didn't want this to happen to me. But eventually Peter rang me and said, look, I'd like you to do this, because I think you could stand up to Kenneth Williams. He said he's causing us a lot of trouble at the minute. And I said, well, what's he doing? He said, well, he's gone so far now, is that when visitors come onto the set, he turns round and moons them. I'm sure that some ladies who don't know what mooning is, somebody would explain it to them. And he used to actually drop his trousers and moon to the people that came in on the floor. And they said, Kenneth, please, what are you doing? And he said, oh, and he did his moon. And so they said, perhaps you could stop him. And I said, oh, thanks very much. Nobody can stop Kenneth, and they never could. I mean, he used to do dreadful things to Charlie Hawtrey. Charlie Hawtrey used to have a plastic bag. In it were 5 woodbines, the Times crossword and a pencil, and a sarnie and an apple. And every single day, Kenneth Williams stole it and hid it. Every day. And Charlie would say, where's my plastic bag? And everybody would go, ah, you got this in the set. Every day it went on, all this hoo-ha. So I did 4. The first one I did, I looked like a very old Yorkshire Terrier with the hair all over here playing the soothsayer in Carry On Cleo. I did Carry On Cowboy. The script was quite funny, and I said, can I make him blind? He said, yeah. He said, yes, go on. Yeah. Can I make him deaf? He said, yeah, go on. So I made him everything. So when you see him, the cowboy, he couldn't see, he couldn't hear, and he walked into walls and got on his horse backwards, and made a bit of fun out of it. Then I played a very strange character, didn't I? I turned the thumb into a monster. I don't know what that one was. What was it? Carry On Screaming, I think. Anyway, they were fun, but they were just cameos, and I enjoyed it. I had fun in all of them, except the last one, and dear God, that was the worst films ever made. Carry On Columbus. Now, here's a funny joke about that. My wife said that Susie, your agent, she'd rung up, and she said that there's a marvellous job for John, is in Columbus. Now, I knew that Gerard Depardieu was playing this big Columbus film, and I thought, wonderful, I'm going to be in a Depardieu film, marvellous. They said, the script's coming tomorrow. And I waited for the postman to come, and the script came through the door, and I rushed, and I opened it, and it was Carry On Columbus. And I'd never been more disappointed in my life. And when I got down there the very first day, I walked into the makeup room, and there was one of our most eminent actresses, Maureen Lipman, and I said, hello, Maureen, dear, and she said, hello, darling.
I said, what are you doing here? And she said, same as you, dear, trying to earn a buck. I said, but not in Carry On Columbus. And she said, yes. I said, you in Carry On Columbus? She said, you wait till you see the Archbishop of Canterbury who's going to marry you. That was T.P. McKenna, one of our top dramatic actors. He only had one line, they cut that out. No, you can't make a picture and try to make somebody into Kenneth Williams. Julian Clary cannot be anybody but Julian Clary. Didn't work. We forget about that one. I want to do what Leslie Phillips does. I want to be a character actor in other people's shows. Now, I don't necessarily want to have things hung round my own neck. I'd like to do things for other people, like Leslie does, playing wonderful character roles in other people's shows. I did it in a show called Virtual Murder, playing an old Basque terrorist who is also, he used to own pawn shops. But eventually, as he was dying, he thought that he'd make good, and he tried to better himself. It was a tremendous part and very well written and the best thing I think I've ever done. And nobody looked at it at all because the show wasn't very successful. And the critics, they looked at about the first three of them, and I was the fourth. And so they weren't looking, so I got no notices and nobody saw it. It was a great tragedy, but that's the way it goes in our business. But nevertheless, I'm still sort of hoping for something interesting like that will happen. At the moment, I've got a lady in America who's just taken a tape of mine because there's a chance that I may play a part that was offered to John Gielgud, but they said that he was too old. That worried me. Would you believe that anybody could be in show business as long as I have? I'm 76, and I've been in show business for 60 of those years, and there I get caught by Noel bloody Edmonds. He said, would you go along and do this show? I was doing a show at the time there called Scrooge with Tony Newley. And he said, would you like to go along and do this sort of Desert Island Discs? And I said, yes. And I went there, and immediately things started going wrong when we broke down, and the poor disc jockey in Manchester was having a lot of problem, and he was crackling, and I couldn't hear him. And then I asked for various records, and they couldn't hear me, and they put the wrong records on. And then the water started coming through the ceiling. And halfway through, the fellow said, oh, incidentally, Noel Edmonds is up here in the studio. Have any objection to coming in afterwards, have a picture taken? And I said, no, not at all, I know him very well. I still didn't realise. And when he came in at the end, if you saw it, and he said, hello, John. He said, what have you been doing? And I said, oh, you'll never believe this. You'll never believe it. And he went, oh, yeah. And he said, oh, by the way, this is for you. And he handed me the Gotcha Award. I said, thanks very much, but I've never done a Gotcha. And he said, you want to bet? And only then, that was the first time that I realised it. Unbelievable. Unbelievable you could be so stupid after all these years. Well, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much indeed. I've had a most wonderful time. I don't know about you, but I've had a lovely time, and thanks for your attention and for your humour. Thank you very much indeed.